Nice.
It looks so good.
I haven't cut it again since last night.
I didn't see you last night.
Oh yeah.
What did you, by the way, did you?
What's that?
Did you do it yourself? One cut it from you.
Oh no, I cut it myself. We were talking about clipping it. I was considering clipping it, and then I decided to clip it, and then I thought, why wait until the clippers get here? And I laid about it with a pair of.
It looks great.
It looks good.
Because why not? It's my hair. I can do what I like with it.
You can. Your party, you can cry if you want to.
Exactly. I feel like if there was ever a sensible and logical time for me to do something really unwise with my hair, this probably is.
This does not look really unwise.
No, that looks
You.
like you've paid a lot of money for that haircut.
And also
Very-
check your privilege.
I just watched it.
I've taken quarantine to stop washing my hair with shampoo.
Oh, how do you get on with that?
It's great. My hair likes it much better. I do still wash it, but with conditioner. And it turns out, like, shampoo's just a conspiracy that people have foisted onto it. It's just not, it didn't do anything. It fucked it up, if anything.
Well, I mean, hairdressers are a little bit undecided on that, though. I know a number of hairdressers who say that your hair won't really actually get the dirt from the real world out without sulfates.
The key is to stay inside so that you don't go out into the dirty world.
Exactly.
Charlotte, which conditioner are you using?
The Curly Girl approved Garnier almond conditioner crutch.
Nice.
Don't know.
Very nice. I use the As I Am co-wash, and that is also really fucking nice. Give that a go sometime.
Is that the coconut one?
It maybe has coconut in.
I might have used that one.
What? Is that Gordon chuckling?
No, it's Jonas.
Jonas! What are you chuckling about, you mischievous boy?
I was saying check your privilege earlier when you started talking about hair. But then you all kept on talking about hair.
It's an outrage.
And it's very insensitive.
I'm so sorry.
I'm okay with that.
On your chin, where I can't grow any hair.
You're not trying hard enough then, Charlotte. And also check out Gordon's username.
We believe in you, Charlotte. You can grow it.
Last time when we left off the book, it was so harrowing that I had like nightmares about it.
Oh no.
Oh no.
So, like, tell us about the nightmare. What happened?
I just kept revisiting points. Is there any spoilers here? Is there, like, surely everybody's here saw the last chapter.
Whoa. I'm going to leave because I was coming to say I haven't seen last night's episode, Saturday's night episode yet. So I'm going to join in later. I will catch up with this tonight or tomorrow and then this, and I'll see you again on tomorrow night. So, sorry.
Good to see you, Ben.
That was, bye.
Enjoy.
Something, bye.
Bye.
Bye. Just in time.
Well, good thing I checked.
Good thing.
Efficient socializing.
There's an error.
I was lying awake, and I was just like revisiting the moment where the clock guy got killed, and then the moment where the guy shows up and the circus isn't there, and Bailey shows up and the circus isn't there anymore. And
it was a pretty dark evening, to be fair.
It was really dark.
What? The circus wasn't there?
The circus is there.
Did I get confused by that last bit? I think I did.
But when Bailey left to go away with the circus.
Yeah.
Is that I can tell when Malcolm arrives because there's like bashing and banging.
Not good at technology.
Yeah, he turned up and the field was empty. So
Oh, I thought it was just he was walking across the fields.
No.
Okay, so
No, it was awful.
It was really bad.
Really sad.
Yeah, hiding away with sadness.
Worst possible way to join a circus.
Pretty
Why
ineffective.
did he wait so long? And then he was so mean to his sister.
Yeah, but that was what made it. That was what kept me up.
Yeah, but she
was
had
like,
it coming.
Yeah,
he can't go back because he was so mean.
I see him being mean to Caroline.
Yeah, she was really mean to him.
She was just like, he was all like, oh, you're so boring, you're so like basic. And she was, I mean, she is rubbish, but like he was a bit over the top, no?
I think it was a really harsh parting shot. Like, you don't want
But
to
also,
say goodbye to your family like that.
But
You
he's a
definitely
shooter.
don't want to come back after you said goodbye to your family like that.
It sounds like he spent his entire childhood being like kind of shat on by his family and not like asserting himself or saying, this is what I think, this is what I want. So I think it was quite good that he could be like, you're basic.
I mean, she did bully him for her whole life, so I suppose, yeah.
Now,
it'd be nice if you could be nice to each other.
This would be less interesting.
I feel like that
Sounds
about
so-
films and books often. Like, why introduce stress and drama into a plot line when we could just, be people just having a nice time
It
and
could
then
be so
going
much sweeter.
Yeah.
I love answers so much. Why don't you all just be nice to each other?
Great story.
Lord. Story time.
Story time.
Story time.
Story time.
Now, I have had a little look to see what chapters we have left, and I think I've divided it up into 4. So we are scheduled for Thursday night being the big finale. I will pause briefly after, like, before the last chapter of this chunk and kind of like wave, and if anyone wants to stop at that point, like shout up. So that will be Visitations, would be the last chapter. And yeah, if people are happy to go on, then I will carry on and do like this particular chunk, and then we will be on schedule for everything being okay for Thursday. Sound all right? Yes? Okay. So, are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Part 4, Incendiary. There are tents, I am certain, that I have not discovered in my many visits to the circus. Though I have seen a great deal of the sights, travelled a number of the available paths, there are always corners that remain unexplored, doors that remain unopened. Friedrich Thyssen, 1896. Technicalities. London, November 1st, 1901. Celia wishes she could freeze time as she listens to the steady beat of Marco's heart against the ticking of the clock. To stay forever within this moment, curled in his arms, his hands softly stroking her back. To not have to leave. She only succeeds in slowing Marco's heartbeat enough that he falls deeply asleep. She could wake him, but already the sky outside is brightening, and she dreads the thought of saying goodbye. Instead, she kisses him gently on the lips and quietly dresses as he sleeps. She takes her ring from her finger and leaves it on the mantel, resting between the 2 hearts emblazoned on the playing card. She pauses as she puts on her coat, looking at the books scattered across the desk. Perhaps if she better understood his systems, she could use them to make the circus more independent, to take some of the weight off of herself, allowing them to be together for more than a few stolen hours without challenging the rules of the game. It is the best gift she can think to give him if they are unable to force a verdict from either of their instructors. She picks up the volume filled with names. It seems a good place to start, as she understands the basis of what it is meant to accomplish. She takes it with her as she leaves. Celia closes the door to Marco's flat as quietly as she can after she slips out into the darkened hall, the leather-bound book tucked under her arm. The locks slide into place behind her with a series of soft, muffled clicks. She does not notice the figure concealed in the nearby shadows until he speaks. "You deceitful little slut," her father says. Celia shuts her eyes, attempting to concentrate, but it has always been difficult to push him away once he has grabbed a hold of her, and she cannot manage it. "I'm surprised you waited in the hall to call me that, Papa," she says. "This place is so well protected it's downright absurd," Hector says, waving at the door. "Nothing could get in without that boy explicitly wanting it there." "Good," Celia says. "You can stay away from him, and you can stay away from me." "What are you doing with that?" he asks, gesturing at the book under her arm. "Nothing to concern yourself with," Celia says. "You cannot interfere with his work," Hector says. "I know. Interference is one of the very few things that is apparently against the rules. I do not intend to interfere. I intend to learn his systems so I can stop having to constantly manage so much of the circus." His systems. Alexander's systems are nothing you should be bothering with. You have no idea what you're doing. I overestimated your ability to handle this challenge. "This is the game, isn't it?" Celia asks. "It's about how we deal with the repercussions of magic when placed in a public venue, in a world that does not believe in such things. It's a test of stamina and control, not skill." "It is a test of strength," Hector says, "and you are weak. Weaker than I'd thought." "Then let me lose," she says. "I'm exhausted, Papa. I cannot do this any longer. It's not as though you can gloat over a bottle of whiskey once a winner is declared." "A winner is not declared," her father says. "The game is played out, not stopped. You should have figured that much out by now. You used to be somewhat clever." Celia glares at him, but at the same time she begins turning over his words in her mind, collecting the obscure non-answers about the rules he has given her over the years. Suddenly the shape of the elements he has always avoided becomes more distinct, the key unknown factor clear. The victor is the one left standing after the other can no longer endure, Celia says, the scope of it finally making devastating sense. That is a gross generalization, but I suppose it will suffice. Celia turns back to Marco's flat, pressing her hand against the door. Stop behaving as though you love that boy, Hector says. You are above such mundane things. You are willing to sacrifice me for this, she says quietly, to let me destroy myself just so you can attempt to prove a point. You tied me into this game knowing the stakes, and you let me think it was nothing but a simple challenge of skill. Don't look at me like that, he says, as if you think me inhuman. I can see through you, Celia snaps. It is not particularly trying on my imagination. It would not be any different if I were still as I was when this started. And what happens to the circus after the game? Celia says. The circus is merely a venue, he says, a stadium, a very festive coliseum. You could continue on with it after you win, though without the game it serves no purpose. I suppose the other people involved serve no purpose as well, then, Celia says. Their fates are only a matter of consequence. All actions have repercussions, Hector says. That's part of the challenge. Why are you telling me all this now when you have never mentioned it before? Before, I had not thought you were in the position to be the one to lose. You mean the one to die? Celia says. A technicality, her father says. A game is completed only when there is a single player left. There is no other way to end it. You can abandon any misguided dreams of continuing to play whore to that nobody Alexander plucked out of a London gutter after all this is over. Who is left then? Celia asks, ignoring his comment. You said Alexander's student won the last challenge. What happened to him? A derisive laugh shudders through the shadows before Hector replies. She is bending herself into knots in your precious circus. Playing with fire. The only illumination in this tent comes from the fire. The flames are a radiant, flickering white, like the bonfire in the courtyard. You pass a fire eater elevated on a striped platform. He keeps small bits of flame dancing atop long sticks while he prepares to swallow them whole. On another platform, a woman holds 2 long chains, each with a ball of flame at the end. She swings them in loops and circles, leaving glowing trails of white light in their paths, moving so quickly that they look like strings of fire rather than single flames on lengths of chain. Performers on multiple platforms juggle torches, spinning them high into the air. Occasionally, they toss these flaming torches to each other in a shower of sparks. Elsewhere, there are flaming hoops perched at different levels that performers slip in and out of with ease, as though the hoops were only metal and not encased in flickering flame. The artist on this platform holds pieces of flame in her bare hands, and she forms them into snakes and flowers and all manner of shapes. Sparks fly from shooting stars, birds flame and disappear like miniature phoenixes in her hands. She smiles at you as you watch the white flames in her hand become, with the deft movement of her fingers, a boat, a book, a heart of fire. The title of this chapter is in Japanese and I can't read it. En route from London to Munich, November 1st, 1901. The train is unremarkable as it chugs across the countryside, puffing clouds of grey smoke into the air. The engine is almost entirely black. The cars that pull it are equally as monochromatic. Those with windows have glass that is tinted and shadows. Those without are dark as coal. It is silent as it travels, no whistles or horns. The wheels on the track are not screeching but gliding smoothly and quietly. It passes almost unnoticed along its route, making no stops. From the exterior, it appears to be a coal train or something similar. It is utterly unremarkable. The interior is a different story. Inside, the train is opulent, gilded and warm. Most of the passenger cars are lined with thick patterned carpets, upholstered in velvets, in burgundies and violets and creams, as though they have been dipped in a sunset, hovering at twilight and holding on to the colours before they fade to midnight and stars. There are lights in sconces lining the corridors, cascades of crystals falling from them and swaying with the motion of the train, soothing and serene. Shortly after its departure, Celia places the leather-bound book safely away, camouflaged in plain sight amongst her own volumes. She changes from her blood-stained gown to a flowing one in moonlight grey, bound with ribbons in black, white and charcoal, which had been one of Friedrich's particular favourites. The ribbons drift behind her as she makes her way down the train. She stops at the only door that has 2 calligraphed characters as well as a handwritten name on the tag next to it. Her polite knock is answered immediately, inviting her inside. While most of the train compartments are saturated with colour, Tsukiko's private car is almost completely neutral. A bare space surrounded by paper screens and curtains of raw silk, perfumed with the scent of ginger and cream. Tsukiko sits on the floor in the centre of the room, wearing a red kimono, a beating crimson heart in the pale chamber. And she is not alone. Isabel lies on the floor with her head in Tsukiko's lap, sobbing softly. "I did not mean to interrupt," Celia says. She hesitates in the doorway, ready to slide the door closed again. "You are not interrupting," Tsukiko says, beckoning her inside. "Perhaps you will be able to help me convince Isabel that she is in need of some rest." Celia says nothing, but Isabel wipes her eyes, nodding as she stands. "Thank you, Kiko," she says, smoothing out the wrinkles in her gown. Tsukiko remains seated, her attention on Celia. Isabel stops next to Celia as she makes her way out the door. "I am sorry about Herr Thiessen," she says. "I am as well." For a moment, Celia thinks Isabel means to embrace her, but instead she only nods before leaving, sliding the door closed behind her. "The last hours have been long for all of us," Tsukiko says after Isabel has departed. "You need tea," she adds before Celia can explain why she is there. Tsukiko sits her down on a cushion and walks silently to the end of the car, fetching her tea supplies from behind one of the tall screens. It is not the full tea ceremony that she has performed on several occasions over the years, but as Tsukiko slowly prepares 2 bowls of green matcha, it is beautiful and calming nonetheless. "Why did you never tell me?" Celia asks when Tsukiko has settled herself across from her. "Tell you what?" Tsukiko asks, smiling over her tea. Celia sighs. She wonders if Lainey Burgess felt a similar frustration over 2 different cups of tea in Constantinople. She has half a mind to break Tsukiko's tea bowl just to see what she would do. "Did you injure yourself?" Tsukiko asks, nodding at the scar on Celia's finger. "I was bound into a challenge almost 30 years ago," Celia says. She sips her tea before adding, "Are you going to show me your scar now that you have seen mine?" Tsukiko smiles and places her tea on the floor in front of her. Then she turns and lowers the neck of her kimono. At the nape of her neck, in the space between a shower of tattooed symbols, nestled in the curve of a crescent moon, there is a faded scar about the size and shape of a ring. "The scars last longer than the game, you see," Tsukiko says, straightening her kimono around her shoulders. "It was one of my father's rings that did that," Celia says, but Tsukiko does not confirm or deny the statement. "How is your tea?" she asks. "Why are you here?" Celia counters. "I was hired to be a contortionist." Celia puts down her tea. "I am not in the mood for this, Tsukiko," she says. "Should you choose your questions more carefully, you may receive more satisfying answers." "Why did you never tell me you knew about the challenge?" Celia asks, "that you had played before yourself." "I made an agreement that I would not reveal myself unless approached directly," Tsukiko says. "I keep my word." "Why did you come here in the beginning?" "I was curious. There has not been a challenge of this sort since the one I participated in. I did not intend to stay. Why did you stay? I liked Monsieur Lefebvre. The venue for my challenge was a more intimate one, and this seemed unique. It is rare to discover places that are truly unique. I stayed to observe. You've been watching us, Celia says. Tsukiko nods. Tell me about the game, Celia says, hoping to get a response to an open-ended inquiry now that Tsukiko is more forthcoming. There is more to it than you think, Tsukiko says. I did not understand the rules myself in my time. It is not only about what you call magic. You believe adding a new tent to the circus is a move? It is more than that. Everything you do, every moment of the day and night is a move. You carry your chessboard with you. It is not contained within canvas and stripes. Though you and your opponent do not have the luxury of polite squares to stay upon. Celia considers this while she sips her tea, attempting to reconcile the fact that everything that has happened with the circus, with Marco, has been part of the game. Do you love him? Tsukiko asks, watching her with thoughtful eyes and the hint of a smile that might be sympathetic, but Celia has always found Tsukiko's expressions difficult to decipher. Celia sighs. There seems no good reason to deny it. I do, she says. Do you believe he loves you? Celia does not answer. The phrasing of the question bothers her. Only hours ago she was certain. Now, sitting in this cave of lightly perfumed silk, what had seemed constant and unquestionable feels as delicate as the steam floating over her tea, as fragile as an illusion. Love is fickle and fleeting, Tsukiko continues. It is rarely a solid foundation for decisions to be made upon in any game. Celia closes her eyes to keep her hands from shaking. It takes longer for her to regain her control than she would like. Isabel once thought he loved her, Tsukiko continues. She was certain of it. That is why she came here, to assist him. He does love me, Celia says, though the words do not sound as strong when they fall from her lips as they did inside her head. Perhaps, Tsukiko replies, he is quite skilled at manipulation. Did you not once lie to people yourself, telling them only what they wished to hear? Celia is not certain which is worse. The knowledge that for the game to end, one of them will have to die, or the possibility that she means nothing to him, that she is only a piece across a board, waiting to be toppled and checkmated. It is a matter of perspective, the difference between opponent and partner, Tsukiko says. You step to the side, and the same person can be either or both or something else entirely. It is difficult to know which face is true. And you have a great many factors to deal with beyond your opponent. Did you not? Celia asks. My venue was not as grand. It involved fewer people, less movement. Without the challenge within it, there was nothing to salvage. Most of it is now a tea garden, I believe. I have not returned to that place since the challenge concluded. The circus could continue after this challenge is concluded, Celia says. That would be nice, Tsukiko says, a proper tribute to your head Tisen. Though it would be complicated, making it completely independent from you and your opponent. You have taken on a great deal of responsibility for all this. You are vital to its operation. If I stabbed a knife in your heart right now, this train would crash. Celia puts down her tea, watching as the smooth motion of the train sends soft ripples through the surface of the liquid. In her head, she calculates how long it would take to halt the train, how long she might be able to keep her heart beating. She decides it would likely depend on the knife. Possibly, she says. If I were to extinguish the bonfire, or its keeper, that would also be problematic, yes? Celia nods. You have work to do if you expect this circus to endure, Tsukiko says. Are you offering to help? Celia asks, hoping she will be able to aid in translating Marco's systems as they share the same instructor. No, Tsukiko says with a polite shake of her head, her smile softening the harshness of the word. If you are unable to manage it properly yourself, I will step in. This has gone on too long already, but I shall give you some time. How much time? Celia asks. Tsukiko sips her tea. Time is something I cannot control, she says. We shall see. They sit in meditative silence for some of that uncontrollable time, the motion of the train gently billowing the silk curtains, the scent of ginger and cream enveloping them. What happened to your opponent? Celia asks. Tsukiko looks not at Celia but down at her tea as she responds. My opponent is now a pillar of ash standing in a field in Kyoto, she says, unless wind and time have taken her away. Escapement. Concord and Boston, October 31st, 1902. Bailey walks circles around the empty field for some time before he can convince himself that the circus is well and truly gone. There is nothing at all, nothing so much as a bent blade of grass to indicate that anything had occupied the space hours before. He sits down on the ground, holding his head in his hands and feeling utterly lost, though he has played in these very fields ever since he was little. He recalls Poppet mentioning a train. A train would have to travel to Boston in order to reach any far-flung destination. Within moments of the thought crossing his mind, Bailey is on his feet, running as fast as he can towards the depot. There are no trains to be seen when he gets there, out of breath and aching from where his bag has been hitting against his back. He had been hoping that somehow the circus train he was not even entirely certain existed would still be there, waiting. But instead the depot is all but deserted. Only two figures sit on one of the benches on the platform, a man and a woman in black coats. It takes Bailey a moment to realise that they are both wearing red scarves. You all right? The woman asks as he runs up to the platform. Bailey cannot quite place her accent. Are you here for the circus? Bailey says, gasping for breath. Indeed we are, the man says with a similar lilting accent. Though it has departed, I trust you have noticed. Closed early as well, but that is not unusual, the woman adds. Do you know Poppet and Widget? Bailey asks. Who? The man asks. The woman tilts her head as though she did not catch the meaning of the question. They're twins. They do a show with kittens, Bailey explains. They're my friends. The twins, the woman explains, and they're wonderful cats. However, did you come to be friends with them? It's a long story, Bailey says. Then you should tell it to us while we wait, she says with a smile. You are off to Boston as well, yes? I don't know, Bailey says. I was trying to follow the circus. That is precisely what we are doing, the man says, though we cannot follow the cirque until we know where it has gone. That should take about a day. I do hope it turns up somewhere manageable, the woman says. How will you know where it is? Bailey asks in a state of mild disbelief. We reverse have our methods, the woman says, smiling. We have a while yet to wait. That should be plenty of time to exchange stories. The man's name is Victor. His sister is Lorena. They are on what they call an extended circus holiday, following Les Cirques des Rêves around to as many locations as they can manage. They normally do this only within Europe, but for this particular holiday they have decided to chase it around the other side of the Atlantic. They had been in Canada previously. Bailey tells them a shortened version of how he came to be friends with Poppet and Widget, leaving out the more curious details. As it creeps closer to dawn, they are joined by another rêveur, a woman named Elizabeth who had been staying at the local inn and is headed to Boston as well now that the circus has departed. She is greeted warmly, and they appear to be old friends, though Lorena says they only met her a few days ago. While they wait for the train, Elizabeth takes out her knitting, needles and a skein of deep red wool. Lorena introduces Bailey to her as a scarfless young rêveur. "I'm not a rêveur, really," Bailey says. He is still not entirely sure he grasps the meaning of the term. Elizabeth looks at him over her knitting, sizing him up with narrowed eyes that remind him of his sternest teachers, though he stands much taller than she does. She leans forward in a conspiratorial manner. "Do you adore Les Cirques des Rêves?" she asks him. "Yes," he says without hesitation. "More than anything in the world?" she adds. "Yes," Bailey says. He cannot keep himself from smiling despite her serious tone and the nerves that are still keeping his heart from beating at a steady rate. "Then you are a rêveur," Elizabeth pronounces, "no matter what you wear." They tell him stories of the circus and of other rêveurs, how there is a society of sorts that keeps track of the movement of the circus, notifying other rêveurs so they might travel from destination to destination. Victor and Lorena have followed the circus as often as their schedules allow for years, while Elizabeth typically only makes excursions closer to New York, and this trip is an extended one for her, though there is an informal club of rêveurs based in the city that holds gatherings from time to keep in touch while the circus is away. The train arrives shortly after the sun has fully risen, and on the way to Boston the stories continue, while Elizabeth knits and Lorena props her head up sleepily on her arm. "Where are you staying in town?" Elizabeth inquires. Bailey has not considered this, as he has been taking this endeavour one step at a time, attempting not to worry about what might happen once they reach Boston. "I'm not entirely sure," he says. "I'll probably stay at the station until I know where to go next." "Nonsense," Victor says. "You shall stay with us. We have nearly an entire floor at the Parker House. You can have August's room. He went back to New York yesterday, and I never bothered to alert the management that we have an unoccupied room." Bailey attempts to argue, but Lorena stops him. "He is terribly stubborn," she whispers. "He will not take no for an answer once he has set his mind to something." And indeed, Bailey is swept into their carriage almost as soon as they step off the train. His bag is taken along with Elizabeth's luggage when they reach the hotel. "Is something wrong?" Lorena asks as he openly stares around the opulent lobby. "I feel like one of those girls in fairy tales, the ones who don't even have shoes and then somehow get to attend a ball at the castle," Bailey whispers, and she laughs so loudly that several people turn and stare. Bailey is escorted to a room half the size of his entire house, but he finds he cannot sleep, despite the heavy curtains blocking out the sunlight. He paces the room until he begins worrying about damaging the carpet, and then he sits in the window instead, watching the people below. He is relieved when there is a knock at the door mid-afternoon. "Do you know where the circus is yet?" he asks, before Victor can even speak. "Not yet, dear boy," he says. "We sometimes have advance notice of where it is headed, but not as of late. I imagine we will have word by the end of the day, and if our luck holds, we will depart first thing in the morning. Do you have a suit?" "Not with me," Bailey says, remembering the suit packed in a trunk at home that was only ever pulled out for special occasions. He guesses he has likely outgrown it in the interim, unable to recall exactly what the last suit-worthy occasion was. "We shall get you one then," Victor says, as though this is as simple a thing as picking up a newspaper. They meet Lorena in the lobby, and the two of them drag him around town on a number of errands, including a stop at a tailor for his suit. No, Lorena says while they look at samples. These are entirely wrong for his colouring. He needs a grey, a nice deep grey. After a great deal of pinning and measuring, Bailey ends up with a nicer suit than he has ever owned in his life. Nicer even than his father's best suit, in a charcoal grey. Despite his protestations, Victor also buys him very shiny shoes and a new hat. The reflection in the mirror looks so different from the one he is accustomed to that Bailey has difficulty believing it is really him. They return to the Parker house with a multitude of packages in tow, stopping by their rooms for hardly enough time to sit before Elizabeth comes to take them down to dinner. To Bailey's surprise, there are almost a dozen rêveurs waiting in the restaurant downstairs, some who will be following the circus and others who are remaining in Boston. His anxiety at the fanciness of the restaurant is eased by the casual, boisterous manner of the group. True to form, they are clad almost entirely in black and white and grey, with bright touches of red on ties or handkerchiefs. When Lorena realises that Bailey has no red, she surreptitiously removes a rose from a nearby floral arrangement to tuck into his lapel. There are endless stories from the circus related over each course, mentions of tents Bailey has never seen and countries he has never even heard of. Bailey mostly listens, still rather astounded that he has stumbled upon a group of people who love the circus as much as he does. Do you think anything is wrong with the circus? Bailey asks quietly, when the table has fallen into separate conversations. Recently, I mean. Victor and Lorena glance at each other as though gauging who should respond, but it is Elizabeth who answers first. It has not been the same side, she says. Victor frowns suddenly while Lorena nods in agreement. Who is Herr Thiessen? Bailey asks. The three of them look somewhat surprised by his ignorance. Friedrich Thiessen was the first of the rêveurs, Elizabeth says. He was a clockmaker. He made the clock inside the gates. That clock was made by someone outside the circus. Really? Bailey asks. It is not something he had ever thought to ask Poppet and Widget about. He had assumed it was a thing born of the circus itself. Elizabeth nods. He was a writer as well, Victor says. That is how we met him years and years ago. Read an article he wrote about the circus and sent him a letter and he wrote back and so on. That was before we were even called rêveurs. He made me a clock that looks like the carousel, Lorena says, looking wistful, with little creatures that loop through clouds in silver gears. It is a wonderful thing. I wish I could carry it around with me. Though it is nice to have a reminder of the circus I can keep at home. I heard he had a secret romance with the illusionist, Elizabeth remarks, smiling over her glass of wine. Gossip and nonsense, Victor scoffs. He did always sound very fond of her in his writing, Lorena says, as though she is considering the possibility. How could anyone not be fond of her? Victor asks. Lorena turns to look at him curiously. She is extremely talented, he mumbles, and Bailey catches Elizabeth trying not to laugh. And the circus isn't the same without this Herr Thiessen? Bailey asks, wondering if this has something to do with what Poppet had told him. It is different without him for us, of course, Lorena says. She pauses thoughtfully before she continues. The circus itself seems a bit different as well. Nothing in particular, only something off kilter, Victor interjects, like a clock that is not oscillating properly. When did he die? Bailey asks. He cannot bring himself to ask how. A year ago tonight, as a matter of fact, Victor says. Oh, I had not realised that, Lorena says. A toast to Herr Thiessen, Victor proposes, loud enough for the entire table to hear, and he raises his glass. Glasses are lifted all around the table, and Bailey raises his as well. The stories of Herr Thiessen continue through dessert, interrupted only by a discussion about why the cake is called a pie when it is clearly cake. Victor excuses himself after finishing his coffee, refusing to weigh in on the cake issue. When he returns to the table, he has a telegram in his hand. "We are headed to New York, my friends." Impasse, Montreal, August 1902. After the illusionist takes her bow and disappears before her rapt audience's eyes, they clap, applauding the empty air. They rise from their seats and some of them chatter with their companions, marvelling over this trick or that as they file out the door that has reappeared in the side of the striped tent. One man, sitting in the inner circle of chairs, remains in his seat as they leave. His eyes, almost hid in the shadow cast by the brim of his bowler hat, are fixed on the space in the centre of the circle that the illusionist occupied only moments before. The rest of the audience departs. The man continues to sit. After a few minutes, the door fades into the wall of the tent, invisible once more. The man's gaze does not waver. He does not so much as glance at the vanishing door. A moment later, Celia is sitting in a chair across the circle from him, still dressed as she had been during her performance, in a black gown covered with delicate white lace. "You usually sit in the back," she says. "I wanted a better view," Marco says. "You came quite a ways to be here." "I had to take a holiday." Celia looks down at her hands. "You didn't expect me to come all this way, did you?" Marco says. "No, I did not." "It's difficult to hide when you travel with an entire circus, you know." "I have not been hiding," Celia says. "You have," Marco says. "I tried to speak with you at Herr Diesen's funeral, but you left before I could find you, and then you took the circus across the ocean. You've been avoiding me." "It was not entirely intentional," Celia says. "I needed some time to think." "Thank you for the pool of tears," she adds. "I wanted you to have a place where you felt safe enough to cry if I could not be with you." She closes her eyes and does not reply. "You stole my book," Marco says after a moment. "I'm sorry," she says. "As long as it is somewhere safe, it does not matter whether I keep it or you do. You could have asked. You could have said goodbye." Celia nods. "I know," she says. Neither of them speaks for some time. "I am trying to make the circus independent," Celia says, "to untie it from the challenge, from me. I needed to learn your system to make it work properly. I cannot let a place that is so important to so many people fade away. Something that is wonder and comfort and mystery all together that they have nowhere else. If you had that, wouldn't you want to keep it?" "I have that whenever I'm with you," Marco says. "Let me help you." "I don't need your help. You cannot do this alone." "I have Ethan Barris and Lainey Burgess," Celia says. "They have agreed to assume management for the basic operation. With a little more training, Puppet and Widget should be able to handle the manipulation aspects that Ethan and Lainey cannot manage. I do not need you." She cannot look him in the eye. "You don't trust me," he says. "Isabel trusted you," Celia says, looking at the ground. "So did Chandrash. How can I believe that you are honest with me and not with them, when I am the one you have the most reason to deceive?" "I never once told Isabel that I loved her," Marco says. "I was young and I was desperately lonely, and I should not have let her think I felt more strongly than I did. But what I felt for her is nothing compared to what I feel for you. This is not a tactic to deceive you. Do you think me that cruel?" Celia rises from her chair. "Good night, Mr. Alistair," she says. "Celia, wait. Marco says, standing but not moving closer to her. You are breaking my heart. You told me once that I reminded you of your father, that you never wanted to suffer the way your mother did for him, but you are doing exactly that to me. You keep leaving me. You leave me longing for you again and again when I would give anything for you to stay, and it is killing me. It has to kill one of us, Celia says quietly. What? Marco asks. The one who survives is the victor, she says. The winner lives, the loser dies. That's how the game ends. That, Marco stops, shaking his head. That cannot be the intent of this. It is, Celia says. It is a test of endurance, not skill. I'm attempting to make the circus self-sufficient before... She cannot say the words, still barely able to look at him. You're going to do what your father did, Marco says. You're going to take yourself off the board. Not precisely, she says. I suppose I was always more my mother's daughter. No, Marco says, you cannot mean that. It's the only way to stop the game. Then we'll continue playing. I can't, she says. I can't keep holding on. Every night it becomes more difficult, and I have to let you win. I don't want to win, Marco says. I want you. Truly, Celia, do you not understand that? Celia says nothing, but tears begin to roll down her cheeks. She does not wipe them away. How can you think that I don't love you? Marco asks. Celia, you are everything to me. I don't know who is trying to convince you otherwise, but you must believe me, please. She only looks at him with tear-soaked eyes, the first time she has held his gaze steadily. This is when I knew I loved you, he says. They stand on opposite sides of a small round room, painted a rich blue and dotted with stars. On a ledge around a pool of jewel-toned cushions, a shimmering chandelier hangs above them. I was enchanted from the moment I saw you, Marco says, but this is when I knew. The room around them changes again, expanding into an empty ballroom. Moonlight filters in through the windows. This is when I knew, Celia says, her voice a whisper echoing softly through the room. Marco moves to close the distance between them, kissing away her tears before catching her lips with his own. As he kisses her, the bonfire glows brighter. The acrobats catch the light perfectly as they spin. The entire circus sparkles, dazzling every patron. And then the immaculate cohesion stops as Celia reluctantly breaks away. I'm sorry, she says. Please, Marco says, refusing to let her go, his fingers holding tight to the lace of her gown. Please don't leave me. It's too late, she says. It was too late by the time I arrived in London to turn your notebook into a dove. There were too many people already involved. Anything either of us does has an effect on everyone here, on every patron who walks through those gates. Hundreds, if not thousands of people. Flies in a spiderweb that was spun when I was 6 years old, and now I can barely move for fear of losing someone else. She looks up at him, lifting her hand to stroke his cheek. Will you do something for me? She asks. Anything, Marco says. Don't come back, she says, her voice breaking. She vanishes before Marco can protest, as simply and elegantly as at the end of her act, her gown fading beneath his hands. Only her perfume lingers in the space she occupied moments before. Marco stands alone in an empty tent with nothing but 2 rings of chairs and an open door waiting for him to leave. Before he departs, he takes a single playing card from his pocket and places it on her chair. One more.
Yes.
Visitations, September 1902. Celia Bowen sits at a desk surrounded by piles of books. She ran out of space for her library some time ago, but instead of making the room larger, she has opted to let the books become the room. Piles of them function as tables, others hang suspended from the ceiling, along with large golden cages holding several live white doves. Another round cage, sitting on a table rather than hanging from above, contains an elaborate clock. It marks both time and astrological movements as it ticks steadily through the afternoon. A large black raven sleeps uncaged alongside the complete works of Shakespeare. Mismatched candles in silver candelabras, burning in sets of 3, surround the desk in the centre of the room. Upon the desk itself, there is a slowly cooling cup of tea, a scarf that has been partially unravelled into a ball of crimson yarn, a framed photograph of a deceased clockmaker, a solitary playing card long separated from its deck, and an open book filled with signs and symbols and signatures procured from other pieces of paper. Celia sits with a notebook and a pen, attempting to decipher the system the book is written in. She tries to think the way she imagines Marco might have as he wrote it, picturing him inscribing each page, rendering the delicate ink branches of the tree that winds throughout the book. She reads each signature over and over, checking how securely each lock of hair is pasted, scrutinizing each symbol. She has spent so much time repeating this process that she could recreate the book from memory, but she still does not fully comprehend how the system works. The raven stirs and caws at something in the shadows. "You're bothering Hugin," Celia says without looking up. The candlelight catches only the edges of her father's form as he hovers nearby, highlighting the creases of his jacket, the collar of his shirt, glinting in the hollows of his dark eyes. "You should really get another one," he says, peering at the agitated raven. "A moonin to complete the set." "I prefer thought to memory, Papa," Celia says. Is the only response. Celia ignores him as he leans over her shoulder, watching her flip through the inscribed pages. "This is a god-awful mess," he says. "A language you cannot speak yourself is not necessarily a god-awful mess," Celia says, transcribing a line of symbols into her notebook. "This is messy work, bindings and charms," Hector says, floating to the other side of the desk to get a better look. "Very much Alexander's style, overly complicated and covert. Yet with enough study, anyone could do it. Quite the contrast to all your lectures about how I was special. You are special. You are beyond this." He waves a transparent hand over the pile of books. "This use of tools and constructs. There is so much more you could accomplish with your talents, so much more to explore. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy," Celia quotes at him. "Please, no Shakespeare. I am haunted by the ghost of my father. I think that should allow me to quote Hamlet as much as I please. You used to be quite fond of Shakespeare, Prospero. You are too intelligent for this behaviour. I expected more of you. I apologise for not living up to your absurd expectations, Papa. Don't you have anyone else to bother? There are very few people I can converse with in this state. Alexander is dreadfully boring, as always. Chandresh was interesting enough, but that boy has altered his memory so many times that it's not much better than talking to myself. Though it might be nice for a change of scenery. You talk to Chandresh? Celia asks. Occasionally, Hector says, inspecting the clock as it turns within its cage. You told Chandresh that Alexander was going to be at the circus that night. You sent him there. I made a suggestion to a drunk. Drunks are highly suggestible and nicely accepting of conversations with dead people. You must have known he could do nothing to Alexander, Celia says. The reasoning makes no sense, not that her father's reasoning often does. I thought the old man could use a knife in the back for a change. That student of his was practically screaming to do it himself, so much so that the idea of it was already in Chandresh's head. All of that rage sneaking into his subconscious from being exposed to it over time. All I had to do was give him a push in the right direction. You said there was a rule about interference, Celia says, placing down her pen. Interfering with you or your opponent, her father clarifies. I can interfere with anyone else as much as I please. Your interfering got Friedrich killed. There are other clockmakers in the world, Hector says. You could find a new one if you are in need of additional timepieces. Celia's hands are shaking as she picks up a volume from the pile of Shakespeare and hurls it at him. As You Like It passes through his chest without pause, hitting the wall of the tent beyond and falling to the ground. The raven caws, ruffling its feathers. The cages around the doves and the clock begin to. The glass over the framed photograph cracks. Go away, Papa, Celia says through clenched teeth, trying to control herself. You cannot keep pushing me away, he says. Celia turns her attention to the candles on the desk, concentrating on a single dancing flame. You think you are making personal connections with these people, Hector continues. You think you mean anything to them. They are all going to die eventually. You are letting your emotions trump your power. You are a coward, Celia says. You are both cowards. You fight by proxy because you are too cowardly to challenge each other directly, afraid that you will fail and have nothing to blame except yourselves. That is not true, Hector protests. I hate you, Celia says, still staring at the candle flame. The shadow of her father shudders and vanishes. There is no frost upon the windows of Marco's flat, so he inscribes lines of symbols in the shape of a letter A with ink, pressing his darkened fingers against the panes. The ink drips down over the glass like rain. He sits staring at the door, twisting the silver ring around his finger in anxious circles until a knock comes early the next morning. The man in the grey suit does not admonish him for calling. He stands in the hall outside the door with his hands on his cane and waits for Marco to speak. She thinks one of us has to die in order for the game to end, Marco says. She is correct. Having the confirmation is worse than Marco had expected. The small glimmer of hope he had held that she might be mistaken is crushed in 3 simple words. To win would be worse than losing, he says. I did inform you that your feelings for Miss Bowen would make the challenge more difficult for you, his instructor replies. Why would you do this to me? Marco asks. Why would you spend all that time training me for such a thing? The pause before the response is heavy. I thought it preferable to the life you might have had otherwise, regardless of the consequences. Marco closes and locks the door. The man in the grey suit lifts his hand to knock again, but then lowers it and walks away instead. charming but deadly. You follow the sound of a flute into a hidden corner, the hypnotic melody beckoning you closer. Seated on the ground, nestled in an alcove on striped silk pillows, are two women. One plays the flute you heard. A burning coil of incense sits between them, along with a large black-lidded basket. A small audience is gathering. The other woman carefully removes the lid from the basket before taking out a flute of her own and adding a counter-melody to the first. Two white cobras coil around each other as they rise from the woven basket, in perfect time with the music. For a moment they seem to be one snake and not two, and then they separate again, moving down along the sides of the basket, gliding onto the ground quite close to your feet. The snakes move back and forth together in motions resembling a strikingly formal dance, elegant and graceful. The music increases in tempo, and now there is something harsher about the way the snakes move. Waltz morphs into battle. They circle each other, and you watch for one or the other to strike. One of them hisses softly, and the other responds in kind. They continue to circle as the music and the incense rise into the starry sky above. You cannot tell which snake strikes first. They are identical, after all. As they rear and hiss and jump at each other, you are distracted by the fact that they are both no longer stark white, but a perfect ebony black.
Golly.
What an exciting chapter.
Right?
So much. Holy shit.
Her dad is an absolute cunt.
I know, right?
Mm-hmm.
He is the worst.
Yeah. Do not approve.
Yeah.
Her dad seemed to be surprised that she hated him.
No.
Yeah.
Did we ever learn how old he is?
Very.
Old as balls.
I just wonder if, living through many, many lifetimes of other people would lead you towards kind of not valuing them.
Must be.
Seeing them as temporary.
I mean, there's been... So, okay, if you work it out, there's been 7 of his past students have taken themselves off the board. He said at the beginning that the total balance lies in his favour. So he's lost 7 times, but Alexander must have lost at least more than 7. And the most recent challenge was Yukiko, and her challenge lasted 37 years. And we don't know how long ago that was now. So they got to be old as fucking balls.
The name that's old as balls,
Yeah, let me
I think.
Balls tend to be the same age as the person they're attached to, but it's the balls.
Did anybody guess that Tsukiko was a previous winner?
No.
How do you feel about that?
No. Also, she seems suddenly way more creepy and mysterious. As soon as they said that, it was like, oh wait, now I don't trust you. And while I was previously shipping her and Isabel, I now no longer am. I'm like, run Isabel, run while you can.
Yeah, you are now Tsukiko, Gordon.
Yes.
You've taken that name for yourself.
Yeah, as soon as I got that bit in the thing, and when she was like, "Oh, there's the," I was like, "Oh, I guess
that's what it was." Yeah.
Yeah, it said at some point that her tattoos were like the trees on Marco's books, but I thought that she was just a wizard rather than like a specific wizard.
Yeah.
just a wizard.
I mean, she showed up mysteriously, so I always thought she was somehow involved, especially because of that same comment as Michael just made. So,
maybe like a judge or something. Like,
yeah, that's what I thought until I realized they were probably going to have at least one of them die.
Her entrance was very much, she just turned up, and then kind of we forgot to question it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, they were like, what are you doing? She was like, you see me bend myself into knots?
Also the way when Hector was saying about, I would go and talk to Chandrash, but his mind has been turned into Swiss cheese by, what's his name? Alexander.
Marco.
Like, holy shit. Was it Marco or was it by AH?
It was Marco.
Marco. So I think basically in order to keep Chandrash safe, like Marco's had to kind of like conceal a whole bunch of stuff from him, but that has had like an adverse effect on his memory. Like I don't.
We saw that happen when he discovered like the spell magic book.
Yeah.
It's basically super extreme gaslighting.
Yeah, but I don't think like the memory thing is done on purpose. I don't think Marco is like deliberately like fucking with Chandrash's mind. I think that is just an like unexpected consequence of this kind of stuff that he's had to do. I don't know.
No, he knows he's doing it. He was talking about it earlier.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
But that wasn't the deliberate outcome. He was just trying to delete the memories. He wasn't trying to permanently alter his ability to memory.
It's like, I'm violating your memories for your own good.
Yeah.
I think having...
And violating your memories is an awkward byproduct of something that serves me, but it's not my main intention.
Wasn't it something about making kind of in order to prevent Chandrash from like questioning the magic that like questioning how the circus runs and how they do all of the stuff that they do, that in order to kind of keep him from prying into that in the way that like Tara did, that Marco kind of had to like make him sort of not notice it, but that has made him go a bit funny.
Also, he is a significant alcoholic.
I think how we judge Marco's character depends a lot on how much we accept had to there. Like, maybe like if he really had to, then okay, he's like doing his best to protect him, but maybe he's just like evil.
And I mean, I guess as well the thing with Marco is that like he's been given like absolutely no guidance whatsoever. Like he is making all of this stuff up and just kind of doing the best. Like I think that he is in many ways a dick, but I do think that he's also just trying to kind of do what he needs to do, and like he was the one who kind of thought of the safeguard and stuff, like to kind of try and protect everyone in the circus, which Celia was like, God, I didn't even think about that. So I think he is trying, but because Alexander was like, no, I'm not going to tell you anything, he doesn't necessarily know what the consequences of his kind of magics will be.
I always feel after watching Jessica Jones season 1, I don't know if any of you seen it, where David Tennant has a bit of mind control powers.
It's so creepy.
It's the creepiest thing ever. And every time I now see even like previous heroes who are like, I'm a superhero, but I have mind control, I'm like, you're just the creepiest people. So it's just like switch. So I automatically assume you're dodgy as fuck. It's such a good show.
Can we still say gay Tsukiko? Because there was a comment about you should be a matchmaker to Alexander and her tearful eyes about her opponent's ashes.
Yeah. This isn't the first time the opponents have fallen in love.
I've always assumed that Hector and Alexander as names mean they're from ancient Greece, unless that's just done as a thing.
What, like they're lovers from ancient Greece?
Yeah, good names, aren't they?
He's
Well,
so
Alexander-
frightfully boring.
Alexander was another name for Paris, wasn't he? Wasn't it? Like Paris is also Alexander. So
I was thinking of Alexander the
They're
Great.
brothers?
brothers.
Why not?
Why not?
Oh my god,
Sibling
it's just
rivalry for
sibling
3,000
rivalry.
years.
Fucking hell.
Hmm?
This is why you should get on well with your siblings so you don't curse a whole load of people into a horror circus, which brings delight and wonder and death. And cake.
Cake and death.